The Irish government is currently trying to pass a criminal justice bill, which has been the subject of some heated debate. Defenders of the bill have argued that the restrictions it apparently places on free speech are for the benefit of all. But critics of the bill say it contains worryingly authoritarian provisions. David Quinn, a columnist for the Sunday Independent, joins us to discuss the bill. David, thanks so much for joining us. Could you perhaps give us some kind of background to this bill, because it hasn't been reported on as much as I would like in England?
Well, it hasn't been reported enough in Ireland either, actually. So this was introduced to replace, or is being introduced to replace, the Incitement to Hatred Act from 1989. And various NGOs decided it doesn't go far enough. We haven't had any prosecutions under the 1989 bill, and we need prosecutions because hate is on the increase in Ireland. And so this bill is currently working its way through the upper house, which is called the Senate over here. It's already gone through more or less through the lower house, and it went through by like 110 votes to 12. There was less of a debate than in Scotland, and there's all kinds of worrying aspects to the bill. We had Helen Joyce over here, by the way, a few weeks ago. It's probably familiar to your viewers, and she was extremely alarmed about it. So among the things it does is introduces obviously the concept of hate. It doesn't define hate. It introduces to one of the protected characteristics the idea of gender, but gender isn't defined. Apart from the idea of intention to cause hate, it has the idea that, well, okay, Andrew Doyle is not intending to cause hate, but he was reckless about it. So he should have known what the effect of his words or his writings were going to be. They can also take a hold of your computer or other electronic device on the grounds that you might have something hateful on it, and you're going to release this at any moment. And if you refuse to hand over your password, they can fine you €5,000. All kinds of alarming aspects.
I mean, there's so much in what you say there that is chilling. I mean, the idea that they can look at your computer, your phone, something like that, and they've come up with this idea that if you have the intent to share the material that could stir up hatred, that is a prosecutable offence. But firstly, how would they know what the intent is, and how are they defining what is hateful? Because we all have different ideas about what we find hateful.
Well, they can't do it. Now, the Justice Minister, Helen McEntee, she's reassuring everybody that everything will be okay in the night. So on the one hand, she's saying the bill is really badly needed because there's so much hate in Ireland. But on the other hand, she's saying, well, when the bill comes into force, it won't really affect all that many people. It'll only affect things at the extremes. But then why do we need to replace the Incitement to Hatred Act of 1989? So this isn't something that she can really explain. So this thing is going to go out into the wild, as it were, sometime in the next few months. And there's going to be all kinds of NGOs just dying to report people for so-called hate. And then we don't know what's going to happen, because it'll go into court eventually. And we have to see what a court and the judge will do. But in the meantime, it's going to have this chilling effect. People are going to be terrified to have the police calling to their door, and that's enough to terrify most people into not speaking out on certain topics.
Well, the point is, I mean, hate crime legislation and hate speech laws across Europe, the common factor is that no one really knows how to define hate. And you're talking about the Irish government saying that it's only going to affect the most extreme instances. But when it comes to the gender debate, we hear activists all the time claiming that, for instance, being misgendered is equivalent to genocide. So they interpret things as being extreme, even when they're not. So how can we be sure that the courts won't do the same?
Well, and in the UK a few years ago, you probably recall, we had Graham Lenihan, who is one of the co-writers of Father Ted, and he had police visiting his door because he had, quote unquote, misgendered someone. And so we just wonder, will something like that happen in Ireland? Because all it takes is an activist to complain about you, and next minute the police might come to your door. I noticed in Scotland, by the way, even though they've passed a bill, it hasn't yet commenced, because police in Scotland say we don't have enough police to enforce this thing, because we don't really know what its scope is going to be. But here in Ireland, we have nearly 500 so-called diversity police officers trained and ready to go. And the police commissioner here keeps on saying, you know, we need this. He talks about 500 or 600 hate crimes last year, but actually when you delve into those figures, you discover an awful lot of them are so-called hate incidents, like the police record in Britain, where it's completely based on the perception of somebody that a hate incident has taken place. And it doesn't even have to be you who are the so-called victim of it. Somebody else can report that something was a hate incident. So this so-called 600 hate incidents are probably not really hate at all.
Well, and we've worked very hard over here to make sure that non-crime hate incidents are no longer a thing, because, of course, people were claiming it. They perceived prejudice where it didn't exist, and that was sufficient for people to have this against their name. But I want to ask you about this speech which went viral, which was Senator Pauline OReilly. Can I just hear about what she had to say? I'd like to hear your response on this. Can we play the clip?
When you think about it, all law, all legislation is about the restriction of freedom. That's exactly what we're doing here, is we are restricting freedom, but we're doing it for the common good. You will see throughout our Constitution, yes, you have rights, but they are restricted for the common good. Everything needs to be balanced. And if your views on other people's identities go to make their lives unsafe, insecure, and cause them such deep discomfort that they cannot live in peace, then I believe that it is our job as legislators to restrict those freedoms.
So restricting the freedoms of the population for the common good, where have we heard that before? Oh, in every single tyrannical regime that's ever existed. Can Pauline OReilly not see that what she's advocating for there is authoritarianism?
Well, I mean, she completely gave the game away, because the government itself is trying to minimise what this bill is going to mean in practice. And here we have somebody who's a member of one of the coalition parties, in this case the Greens, and she's saying it's enough that somebody feels unsafe or insecure or uncomfortable, utterly subjective terms. And she says we can't live in a society where people who belong to certain protected groups feel unsafe, insecure or uncomfortable. So to my mind, that shows just how far-reaching this bill is potentially going to be. And what's really alarming is the lack of proper debate about it. So there's been some in the upper house, the Senate, but it's obviously less important. It's like your House of Lords. So the bill is ultimately going to sail through. There's some small possibility of some kind of amendment that might soften the blow of this thing a little bit. Our media here have mainly been in favour of it, or silent. Our equivalent of the BBC, RTE, has been nearly utterly silent about it. In fact, the weird thing is, here we are in GB News, and GB News is showing more interest in it than our national broadcaster is. And so most of the opposition to it within Ireland has been occurring on social media. So that clip you just showed has had something like 2 million views. Now, a lot of them are because people like you, Andrew, retweeted it. And like about 6 weeks ago, we had Elon Musk copying onto the bill. And we also had people like Jordan Peterson also copying onto the bill. So we've got these really big figures from overseas saying, hang on a minute, we've got a problem in Ireland. And the problem, by the way, in Ireland is we used to be the most Catholic country in the world, and now we're kind of moving over to being the most politically correct country in Ireland. So we're kind of overcompensating for it. But we're going from one type of authoritarianism in the past to a brand new form today.
I did want to ask you about that, David, because it does strike me that there is the activism within Ireland is far more extreme and aggressive and militant than you see even over here. And I wonder to what extent that was because you have this history of Catholicism, which was then sort of swept away in the public consciousness by the same-sex marriage. And then since then, you have politicians and the media class in Ireland using terms like unsafe, which is straight out of the lexicon of critical social justice, otherwise known as wokeness.
You see, I think Ireland is a country, because we're a small country, we're extremely consensus driven. And I think what's turning out in Ireland is we kind of only allow one idea at a time. And if you don't go along with that idea, you're cancelled, you're silenced, you're not given platforms. And this happens in all kinds of informal ways like Britain. So all kinds of people now simply don't get invited to universities anymore to take part in debates. We had, by the way, a couple of years ago, Richard Dawkins was supposed to speak at Trinity College Dublin to the HIST Society, the Historical Society, which is apparently the oldest debating society in the world. But a new committee came in and they disinvited him because a few years ago he described Islam as the greatest force for evil in the world today. So they said we can't have him. But now what's coming along is, so there's all kinds of informal ways of censoring people. So now they're going to come along with this bill, which is a formal way to do it. And ironically, a few years ago, Ireland got rid of the blasphemy law from its constitution. So you can say blasphemous things about God. But the new form of blasphemy is you can't say blasphemous things about certain minorities. So the ironic thing again is we've replaced this really strict kind of Catholic consensus with this extremely strict PC one. And the same people who kind of were extremely opposed to the church and its dominance are the same people who are introducing a lot of this sort of stuff, and they can see the irony and they can see the double standard involved.